You're just a nurse. The surgeon laughed, until the SEAL Admiral said her call sign. You're just a nurse. The words weren't whispered. They were thrown. Across a brightly lit operating room, beneath cold surgical lights, in front of an entire medical team. The surgeon didn't even look up when he said it. His gloves were still stained from the emergency procedure. His tone carried the kind of confidence that comes from years of authority, and just enough arrogance to make it sting. She stood at the prep table, chart in hand. Steady, professional, silent. The hospital wing was buzzing that night. A high-priority patient had been airlifted in under heavy escort. Unmarked vehicles lined the entrance. Security personnel stood at every hallway intersection. It wasn't an ordinary trauma case. It was someone important. Very important. The surgeon removed his mask and scoffed when she calmly questioned a dosage on the chart. Stay in your lane, he said. This is beyond your level. A few interns shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. She didn't argue. Didn't defend herself. She simply met his eyes for a moment, not defiant, not intimidated, just certain. Outside the operating room, whispers spread quietly among the security detail. The patient wasn't just any officer. He was a Navy SEAL Admiral. A man who had commanded some of the most classified operations in modern military history. A man whose survival mattered beyond hospital walls. Inside, tension grew. The Admiral's vitals fluctuated. Blood pressure unstable. Internal complications more severe than initially assessed. The surgeon barked orders rapidly. But she noticed something. A subtle change in rhythm. A reaction pattern she had seen before, not in civilian hospitals, but in field trauma units overseas. Her voice was calm when she spoke again. Sir, we need to check for secondary internal bleeding. Now. The surgeon snapped. I said I've got it handled. Silence followed. Except for the monitors. Beep, beep, beep. Then an alarm tone. Chirp. Sudden. Vitals dropping. The room shifted from control to crisis in seconds. The surgeon's confidence cracked just slightly. She moved without waiting for permission. Adjusted positioning. Called for a specific instrument. Directed pressure precisely where it needed to be. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't emotional. It was trained instinct. The kind forged under pressure most people never experience. The bleeding was located. Controlled. Stabilized. The room exhaled. The surgeon stepped back, stunned at how quickly she had identified what he missed. Before he could speak, the operating room doors opened. 2 uniformed officers stepped in, followed by a man with quiet authority in his stride. Decorations lined his chest. Silver hair. Eyes sharp as steel. He looked directly at her. Not the surgeon. Not the team. Her. A faint, knowing expression crossed his face. And then he said her call sign. The room froze. Because that name didn't belong to just a nurse. The room went still. Not quiet. Still. Because the name the Admiral had spoken was not written on her badge. It wasn't printed on the hospital roster. And it certainly wasn't something a civilian surgeon would ever recognize. Valkyrie. The word hung in the sterile air like a classified file left open on the wrong desk. The surgeon blinked. One of the interns looked confused. But the 2 uniformed officers near the door straightened immediately. She didn't flinch. Didn't smile. Didn't react at all, except for the faintest shift in posture. Recognition. Respect. The Admiral stepped further into the room. Even injured, even pale from blood loss, his presence carried command. You always did have a habit of showing up exactly when things went sideways, he said calmly. The surgeon finally found his voice. Admiral, with all due respect, she's a nurse assigned to this floor. The Admiral's eyes moved to him slowly. Cold. Measured. No, he replied. She's a combat trauma specialist attached to Naval Special Warfare. Silence fell heavier than before. The surgeon's expression shifted from irritation to confusion. She kept her focus on the monitors, adjusting medication levels with calm precision. The Admiral continued. Fallujah. 2012. Helmand. 2014. She stabilized men who were given less than 5% odds. His voice never rose. It didn't need to. The interns exchanged glances. The surgeon swallowed. You're saying she was deployed? The admiral almost smiled. I'm saying she kept my team alive when the evacuation bird was 30 minutes out and we had 9 minutes of blood left. No one spoke after that. The only sound was the steady rhythm of the heart monitor, now stable. She stepped back slightly, allowing the surgical team to resume their work. Professional. Controlled. No ego. But the dynamic in the room had shifted completely. The surgeon looked at her differently now. Not as support staff. Not as subordinate. But as someone who had stood in operating environments far less forgiving than polished hospital floors. You should have said something, he muttered quietly. Her answer was simple. It wasn't relevant. Outside the room, security personnel moved with renewed confidence. The admiral was stable. But inside, something else had stabilized too. Respect. The surgeon cleared his throat. I appreciate the assist. She gave a short nod. No triumph in her eyes. Just composure. But the admiral wasn't finished. As he was prepped to be moved to recovery, he looked back at her once more. Valkyrie, he said, firm enough for everyone to hear. You're still on my team. The meaning wasn't ceremonial. It wasn't symbolic. It was recognition. And in that operating room, under fluorescent lights instead of battlefield smoke, everyone understood something powerful. Titles don't reveal experience. And rank doesn't always wear scrubs. The surgeon removed his gloves slowly. The earlier words, "You're just a nurse," echoed differently now. Because the woman he had dismissed had once been the difference between life and death for America's most elite warriors. And the lesson was only beginning. The hospital room faded into memory for a moment. Because when the admiral said, Valkyrie, it wasn't just a nickname. It was history. Years earlier, long before polished hospital floors and sterile surgical lights, she had been deployed alongside a unit under the command of the man now lying in recovery. The mission had taken place in Helmand Province. Desert wind. Zero cover. Night operation. What was meant to be a high-value extraction turned into a trap. Enemy fire erupted from rooftops and alleyways. Communications jammed. The evacuation bird delayed. The team took heavy casualties within minutes. She wasn't supposed to be outside the perimeter. Medical support was meant to stay behind cover. But when the first operator went down in the open street, bleeding fast, she moved. Not recklessly. Decisively. Bullets cracked past her position. Dust kicked up around her boots. One of the operators shouted for her to fall back. She didn't. She reached the wounded man, applied pressure, sealed the wound, stabilized breathing, all under active fire. Another man dropped. Then another. Within minutes she had 3 critically wounded SEALs behind partial cover, working through trauma protocols with almost mechanical calm. The admiral, then a commander, had been hit by shrapnel during the blast that disabled their comms vehicle. Blood loss was severe. Evacuation was still 20 minutes out. In battlefield medicine, 20 minutes can mean forever. Someone yelled, "We're losing him." She didn't panic. She calculated. Improvised a transfusion setup from limited supplies. Directed 2 operators to establish a defensive perimeter while she worked. Her gloves were slick with blood. Her voice never shook. When the medevac helicopter finally cut through the night sky, the admiral was still alive. Barely. Later, during debrief, one of the team members had said it quietly. She pulled them out like a Valkyrie. The name stuck. Not because it sounded dramatic, but because in that chaos, she had carried warriors back from the edge. Back in the present hospital corridor, that story wasn't written on her badge. It wasn't framed on a wall. It lived only in the memories of those who survived. The surgeon, now aware of her past, stood outside the recovery room, replaying everything in his mind. The tone he had used. The dismissal. The assumption. Inside, the admiral rested, stable now. She stood near the window, hands folded calmly in front of her. Not seeking acknowledgement. Not waiting for apology. Just present. The surgeon approached slowly. "I didn't know," he said quietly. She turned toward him. "You weren't supposed to." No bitterness. No edge. just fact. He hesitated. I was wrong. She studied him for a moment, the same way she had once assessed vital signs under gunfire. Then she nodded once. Patients come first, she said. That's the only rank that matters in here. The lesson wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it settled deeper than any reprimand could. Because humility doesn't come from being corrected. It comes from realizing you underestimated someone who didn't need recognition to be exceptional. And as the hospital lights dimmed for the night shift, the story of Valkyrie had quietly reshaped more than one ego. But the final moment, the one that would seal the lesson, was still coming. Morning light filtered softly through the hospital windows. The chaos of the night had settled into quiet routine. Monitors hummed steadily. Footsteps echoed in distant corridors. Inside the recovery suite, the Navy SEAL Admiral was awake. Weaker, but alert. And the first name he asked for wasn't the surgeon's. It was hers. Is Valkyrie still on shift? The attending officer nodded. Yes, sir. Moments later, she stepped into the room. Same composed posture. Same steady presence. No medals on her uniform. No decorations on her chest. Just scrubs and a name badge. He studied her for a moment. Still saving stubborn operators, I see. She allowed the faintest hint of a smile. Some habit stick, sir. The surgeon entered quietly behind her. The confidence he once carried so loudly had been replaced with something more grounded. Perspective. The Admiral turned his gaze toward him. You've got a good one here, he said firmly. You won't find many who've worked trauma with rounds cracking overhead. The surgeon nodded. I'm aware of that now. There was no tension in his voice. No defensiveness. Just acknowledgement. The Admiral shifted slightly, wincing but determined to finish what he started. In my world, he said, rank matters. Titles matter. But when bullets fly, only competence survives. His eyes moved back to her. She earned that call sign because she never asked who outranked her. She asked who needed saving. The words hung heavy in the room. The surgeon stepped forward. I owe you an apology, he said plainly. I judged you by your title. She met his eyes, calm as ever. And I judged you by your reaction, she replied gently. We're even. It wasn't sarcasm. It wasn't superiority. It was grace. The Admiral gave a quiet chuckle, then winced again. That's why she's still on my team, he said. Outside the room, interns whispered among themselves. The story had already begun spreading, not about an argument, but about a lesson, about assumptions, about humility, about how the quietest person in the room sometimes carries the heaviest experience. Later that afternoon, as the Admiral was prepped for transfer to a secure military facility, he paused at the doorway. Security lined the hall. Officers stood at attention. He looked at her one final time. Valkyrie, he said clearly so everyone could hear. Dismissed. It wasn't an order. It was recognition. A salute without raising a hand. She gave a small nod in return. As the convoy departed and the hallway returned to normal hospital rhythm, the surgeon stood beside her. You could have told anyone who you were, he said quietly. She adjusted her gloves and turned back toward the nurse's station. I didn't need to. And that was the final lesson. Respect isn't demanded. It's demonstrated. Titles can be loud. Experience doesn't have to be. And in the halls of that hospital, long after the Admiral had gone, one truth remained. She was never just a nurse. She was the calm in chaos. The steady hand in crisis. The one who didn't wear her past, but carried it with honor. And from that day forward, no one in that hospital ever underestimated her again.